This is wrestling's greatest moments.
Sweet Daddy Siki covered all the bases. Wrestler? Check. Trailblazer? Check. Musician and disc jockey? Check. Lady Clairol model? Wait, what? In a profession where many a wrestler is billed as one of a kind, Sweet Daddy really was, living by his own rules at a time when being different could cost you your livelihood and even your life. Sit back as wrestling's greatest moments looks at Mr. Irresistible, the Sweet Daddy Siki story. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. Elkin James, the man best known as Sweet Daddy Siki, kept many details about his life a secret. Nonetheless, historian Greg Oliver's research discovered that James was born on June 16, 1933, in Grimes, Texas. The African-American future wrestler later moved to Los Angeles, where he became a pro wrestling fan. He was drafted during the Korean War and served in the United States Army. Fortunately, a peace treaty was signed while he was on his way to Korea. Nevertheless, he still served there, providing guard duty in the hazardous environment. He attained the rank of corporal, but despite the Army asking him to re-enlist, he had other plans. Elkins returned to the United States, where he joined wrestler Sandor Sabo's school, learning the ropes and attempting to break into the grappling game. Fighting to break into wrestling. Getting into pro wrestling led to several challenges for Elkins. While he received his training, getting a wrestler's license proved problematic in California. Elkins adopted the name of former wrestler Reg Siki, eventually finding work in promoter Elephant Boy Tony Oliva's territory. Breaking into wrestling is difficult, as is the grind would-be stars endure while attempting to reach the top. In his memoir, Adam Copeland on Edge, wrestler Edge recalled his wrestling trainer, Sweet Daddy Siki, telling him about his struggles. Being an African-American wrestler in the 60s, with a blonde afro, Siki had experienced some tough times. He ate out of dumpsters, slept in alleys, and made no money. He said that could all happen to me unless I really wanted it. Copeland, who had won a contest for training at the wrestling school, would never forget Sweet Daddy's role in helping him become a star. Sweet Daddy Siki played a part in Edge's 2011 WWE Hall of Fame induction. Just when Reg Siki became Sweet Daddy Siki is unclear, but Reg never let challenges stop him from fulfilling his dream of becoming a star. In 1959, Sweet Daddy got a major rub when Nature Boy Buddy Rogers met him in Canton, Ohio. Rogers was a main event talent and was in consideration for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. The Nature Boy knew how to make opponents look good, even in defeat. However, Rogers planned to put Siki over. According to historian Tim Hornbaker, on February 14th, in Canton, Rogers, ran into Sweet Daddy Siki, a talented upstart from Texas with 4 years as a pro. A relative newcomer to the region, Siki was already a big hit and garnering rave reviews for his sensational style. Rogers put Siki over in 2 straight falls and lost the Eastern title in what was their first singles encounter. The win over Rogers was followed by more matches, furthering Siki's success. Next level heat. Elkin James wasn't afraid to get heat, regardless of the potential consequences. According to historian and journalist Greg Oliver, at one point, he changed his name to Mau Mau Siki after the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya and was nearly hung in Walla Walla, Washington. The Mau Mau uprising was a revolution by citizens of the African nation Kenya against British colonial rulers. The Mau Maus were a secret society organized to sustain the revolution. The conflict raged for years in the 1950s until British authorities finally quashed it. Needless to say, assuming the name of an African group opposing white colonial rule didn't go over well with some fans. Siki would recall the crowd's reaction and his response. "I was the last one to leave the dressing room, and people were out there waiting for me. They had a rope up in a tree," he said. "When you're young, you do a lot of foolish things. I walked downstairs, laughing like hell. Ha ha, you crazy people. I walked right through them. I didn't run. One thing I learned, you don't run. You start running, that's a bad thing. They run after you and get you." Sweet Daddy Siki wasn't afraid to defy wrestling's color barrier. Wrestlers Bobo Brazil and Sailor R. Thomas, to name a few, dealt with racial discrimination before Sweet Daddy, but Siki blazed a trail in his way. As noted in an article by CBC.com, Siki, did take part in what's thought to be the first integrated world championship match in wrestling history when he faced in-ring rival and real-life friend Nature Boy Buddy Rogers in Greensboro, North Carolina. Both men were threatened by the Ku Klux Klan, Siki for daring to touch a white man, Rogers for helping integrate the sport. Klansmen sat at ringside. Thankfully, Rogers and Siki left the arena unharmed. Throughout his career in the United States, Siki would have more run-ins with the clan, but refused to back down in the face of threats. The only problem with this story is that there's no record of it happening. Wrestling's greatest moments scoured record sites, and even noted historian Greg Oliver writes of Siki's account of the bout. "When I walked out there, no lie, you could hear a pin hit the floor," said Siki. The referee told Siki not to throw even one punch. Rogers took it all in strut, and Siki was counted out in the finish. Historians have tried to find record of this bout, without luck, but Siki told the story so well, and so often, there has to be a grain of truth to it. That's not to say it didn't happen. Wrestlers' memories are just as prone to error as anyone else's. Add in the notorious lack of accurate records from this era, and it's possible it did happen. Nature Boy Buddy Rogers did wrestle Sweet Daddy Siki many times. He also defended his NWA World Heavyweight Championship against African-American wrestlers Sailor Art Thomas and Luther Lindsay. Like many milestones in wrestling, verifying who was the first wrestler to accomplish something notable is often impossible. Even if the Rogers-Siki match didn't happen as Siki recalls, his trailblazing efforts cannot be denied. Mr. Irresistible worked as a heel when African-American wrestlers were often forced to play babyfaces. They also were sometimes portrayed as second-rate wrestlers, or in roles that catered to stereotypes. Sweet Daddy Siki stood his ground, whether he worked as a babyface or heel. Sweet Daddy Siki wrestled in the South and other portions of the United States, dealing with the racial prejudice directed against him. He also worked in Canada, where he fell in love with the nation, eventually relocating there in 1961. There, he met his wife Anne. Then racism nearly ended Siki's career. Success in New York. His popularity on the rise, Siki went to work in Vince McMahon Sr.'s NWA Capital Wrestling territory after Sweet Daddy's friend Buddy Rogers recommended him. Siki was faring well in McMahon's territory. That is, until he brought his wife Anne to a party attended by wrestlers and some promoters. That shouldn't have been a problem, but Siki's wife was white. Suddenly, Siki's star fell, and he dropped from the upper card and main event to lower card status. In some cases, he couldn't find any work. It was a different time, and younger fans may be surprised to learn that there were laws in some states that prohibited what was labeled as miscegenation. Not until 1967 did the United States Supreme Court rule that laws criminalizing interracial marriage were unconstitutional. The Supreme Court decision didn't stop promoters from cooling off Siki's push. Undaunted, Elkins headed to Canada, enjoying the greatest success of his pro wrestling career. Siki worked in Canada's top promotions, including Maple Leaf Wrestling, Stampede Wrestling, and Montreal's Grand Prix Wrestling. Siki's skills, including his trademark headbutt and neckbreaker, and showmanship led to campaigns in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and the Caribbean. Sweet Daddy Siki earned singles and tag team gold in many promotions. He also was a top star and main eventer in many promotions. Mr. Irresistible. Sweet Daddy Siki, he cultivated a persona of an egotistical heel and entered the ring with a mirror to admire his good looks, which included his blonde hair. Siki recalls being a trendsetter. "I was the first black guy to have blonde hair. I was the first one. I could do commercials for Miss Clairol because I've been bleaching my hair since '56, something like that." Sweet Daddy still remembers the reactions he got when he went blonde. Prepping for a booking in Toronto, he first bleached his hair while working in New York, heading into a Harlem beauty parlor to change his life forever. "I stepped out on the street, and you should have seen the cars stopping," he remembered. "They're all looking. They've never seen anything like me before. No, sir, never seen anybody like me." He also showed a style all his own. Larry Matisek, best known for his time working with legendary promoter Sam Muchnick in the NWA St. Louis territory, remembers, "I saw Sweet Daddy Siki carrying a purse, something unheard of in that era, and nobody at the hotel dared ask him about it." While Siki incorporated elements from previously successful acts, such as Gorgeous George, he put his touch on things, all the while maintaining his trademark modesty. "A lot of people try to copy me, but there's only one Niagara Falls and only one Mona Lisa. And there's only one Mr. Irresistible, Sweet Daddy Siki." There are many stories about Mr. Irresistible, including this from superstar Billy Graham's memoir. At the Waikiki Circle, tourists were always curious about Siki's ethnic background. Talking out the side of his mouth, he'd tell them that he was a legit descendant of Hawaiian royalty. "Oh, really?" they'd answer excitedly. "Can we take a picture with you?" A man of many talents, Sweet Daddy Siki was adept at more than pro wrestling. After retiring from action in the 1980s, Siki teamed up with wrestlers Johnny Powers and Ron Hutchinson to run a wrestling school. Siki helped train future WWE superstars Edge and Christian. He also was a musician and recorded several singles. The musical talent culminated in 3 country music albums and a rock album. After retiring, Siki continued entertaining, this time as a DJ with a karaoke machine. According to Greg Oliver, Mr. Irresistible bought himself DJ equipment and a karaoke machine, and took his act to parties and taverns across southern Ontario, hitting many of the little towns that he had wrestled in while working for Bearman Dave McKigney. Oozing charisma and adept at working a crowd, Sweet Daddy's new venture was the right follow-up to his decades in wrestling. Sweet Daddy Siki's passing was announced on January 1, 2025. Slam Wrestling's Greg Oliver, who wrote a 2017 documentary on Sweet Daddy Siki, reported that Sweet Daddy Siki had been battling dementia for several years. Mr. Irresistible passed away on December 31, 2024, at age 91. What do you think of wrestler Sweet Daddy Siki's amazing life? Did you ever see him wrestle? Share your thoughts in the comments section and let us know if there are any videos you'd like wrestling's greatest moments to cover. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel, follow us on X and Instagram, and spread the good news about wrestling's greatest moments, the channel that celebrates the squared circle.